Hey, good afternoon, students. We now come to the last lecture in this research and publication ethics series. So I will start from where I left off day before yesterday. So I had talked to you about authorship issues, then how to address complaints and appeals to different journals. I also told you about how authorship disputes and misconducts can occur and why they occur, the reasons for the authorship misconduct to occur. So I had discussed all those things. So I think I stopped at the point where I was discussing how different journals address complaints and appeals from authors. So I start with that itself. I think I have already told you about the Springer publisher and then the American Physical Society. I have one more example, that is the Royal Society of Chemistry. Yeah, so the Royal Society of Chemistry has a slightly different kind of appeal process. And here the journal gives the authors an opportunity to respond on the editorial decision on the manuscript. They have a right to appeal to the editor against any decision taken on their manuscript at any stage, whether it could be at the screening process or it could be regarding the review process. And so once the authors make an appeal, then it will be considered at the discretion of the Royal Society of Chemistry. And the way it is done is that the author sends a rebuttal letter to the editor stating clearly why the author would disagree with the decision on the manuscript, and of course give a very detailed response to the reviewer's comments, if any. And then of course the editor would consider the appeal, and then all of them are handled on a case-to-case basis, and the decision of the editor will be final. So if the appeal is granted, then of course the manuscript will undergo further assessment by maybe an independent reviewer, because you may feel that the reviewers are biased. And then the editor will make a final decision on the manuscript. So this is how most of the appeal procedures in journals they proceed. So there is always a provision given to the author to appeal against the decisions taken by the editor or the reviewers or the publishers. So to give an example how it is done, I'll illustrate with this plagiarism complaint from one of the authors. Some author X of a paper was published in journal A. He actually sends a complaint to the editor-in-chief of this journal A, saying that his paper has been actually plagiarized by somebody and has been published in some other journal B. And then the authors of the paper in journal B, it seems they did not respond to the letters sent by the original author X, asking for an explanation for this plagiarism. Then, of course, the editor of journal A, he compared the two papers and he confirms the plagiarism, that the plagiarism has occurred. Then the editor even tried to contact the editor of journal B, where the plagiarized version of the paper was, manuscript was published. But no response came from the journal B, even after several reminders. And after that, of course, the journal A stopped doing anything more other than that. But then the original author X, he could not keep quiet. And he continued to ask the journal A what is being done. So then, of course, the journal A took some decision, and they were considering publishing some kind of an expression of concern or a note of plagiarism in the original paper, so that it would inform the community that, look, there is some other paper in journal B which is a plagiarized version. But then, you know, that's the author was not really happy with that. So then it was sent to the Coke Forum. And the Coke Forum also agreed that there's often very little the editor can do in such a situation, because the other journal is just refusing to engage. And so one suggestion was that the publisher of journal B could be contacted, and if there's no response from the editor, that means the person above the editor, who is the actual publisher of the journal. And the publisher should take responsibility in these cases. So escalating the issue to a publisher level could be also considered. And also it could be checked whether this journal B is a member of COPE. And if so, then a complaint with COPE can be registered. But you see, the main problem in all such cases would be that if this journal B happens to be what is called a predatory journal, they are not going to say anything. They will just keep quiet. Only the way to approach such cases would be the legal route. And because it's a question of copyright violation. And very often this thing happens where unscrupulous journals, what are called predatory journals, they do not respond to any of these requests. And so the only way could be that the journal A could take some kind of a legal action. But these kind of things happen very rarely and far between, and very often nothing comes out of such efforts. Okay, then there's a very interesting article which appeared in the journal Nature. And as I said, one can always appeal when the authors feel aggrieved about the decisions taken by the editors. But then there was a very interesting article which it was titled as How Not to Appeal. So what it tries to say is that most of the cases, the editorial decisions are usually fair. So when you face a rejection of your manuscript, it is always to mull over that decision for some time. You can also talk to your colleagues or collaborators on the issue, why it was rejected, what were the grounds for rejection, and a proper discussion must be really made, going into all the pros and cons of the whole thing, and only then think about making an appeal. And sometimes the referees, they say that, look, what you have given, the data which has been presented in the manuscript may not be enough. And they may want you to give some extra data or collect more data and some more ranges, etc. So if that is so, then of course you cannot say anything against it. And only way out is to try and comply with the referee's suggestion and take fresh or more data and try to satisfy the referee. So unless and until you find that you have a strong footing scientifically on this issue of rejection, okay, only then one can go ahead and make an appeal, and also, of course, make a very, very proper, scientifically sound appeal, and offer to clear all the misconceptions that must have occurred to the editor or the referees. And lastly, one very important advice is that don't try, in case you are a very important personality in your field, do not try to throw your weight around, because it just makes no difference at all, even if you are a Nobel Prize winner. So this is a very important advice which has been given in this article by Nature, which appeared in Nature Human Behavior. And okay, so that's how it is with complaints and appeals. So now I just want to take you over another journey where there's something called subscription-based journals and open access journals. To explain this two kinds of, you may already be knowing about them, but still let me explain to you about these two types of journals. One needs to go a little back in history and see how this whole thing of scientific publishing started. This happened quite long back, that was around the 1600s, where actually the very first, organized scientific exchange of ideas started taking place. So before these times, scientists were mostly working singly or alone, like the example of Galileo, which I had given you. And whenever the scientist could felt that he had discovered something or found out some new thing, naturally, of course, there is an urge, there's a human urge to share the excitement with others who would be willing listeners to your arguments. So people, scientists in those days used to exchange ideas singly over letters exchanged between themselves. And so that's how it used to go. But there was no such thing like an organized activity. There were no societies, there were no scientific societies in those days. So the very first societies started only around 1600s with the Royal Society of London, then the French Academy of Sciences. And once these two people started the societies, so scientists started gathering in the meetings held under these societies and started exchanging ideas in a group. And the very first formal scientific journal was actually published by the French. It was called the Journal des Savants. And so this was the very first scientific journal, which appeared sometime again 1660s. And and immediately after this appeared, then the British were not too far behind. So they published the Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society. So this Philosophical Transactions also was a very important journal, and it still exists to this day. The Philosophical Transaction still exists, and it's considered as a fairly good journal with very good papers. And if you see the papers which were published in the very first journal of the Philosophical Transaction, you'll be really surprised. I mean, they are so simple kinds of the first, this was actually started by this person, Henry Oldenburg. Okay, when he found that the French were already off the blocks, so he wanted to start an English journal. And so the first paper was something called the Account of the Improvement of Optic Glasses. Then there was an article by Robert Hooke, and Hooke is none other than the person who wrote the Hooke's Law. And then you can also find Robert Boyle publishing two papers, An Experimental History of Cold. So these were the very first papers which appeared and published in a scientific journal. And so the whole process started off from that point onwards. And of course, it was quite a different kind of a world in those days. And the scientific publishing was quite a different ballgame altogether in those days. Then, of course, we found that the peer review process. See, it is so strange that the peer review process, which you find, which is absolutely the in thing today, no paper gets through without a peer review. So this peer review process actually did not begin until the second half of the 20th century. This was as recent as 1970s. So the very first formal peer review process, as we know of it today, it started only around 1970s. So it was that recent, in fact. And this was the very first paper which appeared in the journal Nature. So this is the first paper published under Nature, and as you know, it's a weekly journal, and it is still published as a weekly journal, and it's considered one of the top journals in scientific publishing. So, so what happened was, since all those years, the print journals were the norm of publishing scientific research. So whenever you had anything to publish scientifically, you had to approach any one of these print journals. And the problem was that these print journals were very expensive to acquire. So individual scientists on their own find it very difficult to buy these journals because you have to subscribe to these journals. And so the only way out was that the institutions and the libraries in the institutions could actually afford to subscribe to these journals because of very high subscription rates, and then make them accessible to the scientific community of those institutions. And so if you are a part of that institution, we could always access these print journals in the library, because the library used to subscribe to these journals. But if you consider the publishing situation, say 20, 30 years back, or 30 to 40 years back, it was quite primitive as compared to what happens today. So the researchers needed to type out their manuscripts or write them very neatly, and then make copies of those manuscripts and submit them by post to the journals for consideration. And typically, it used to take, if you're sitting in India and you want to publish in, say, a journal from the United States, the post would take typically around 1 month, or if you send by air mail, it used to be very expensive. So one used to send it by surface mail. It was cheap, but it used to take 1 month to maybe 1.5 months or so, just to travel from one point to the other point. And then again, it had to go through the different procedures and to be sent to the referees, and it was sent by post everywhere. There was no question of email those days. So it used to take fairly long time, and by the time you had 1 or 2 exchanges and reviews, etc., and corrections and all those resubmissions, it was almost taking 1 to 1.5 years before you could see your manuscript if it has been accepted in print. And then again, when suppose a manuscript was accepted, the authors were required to pay certain publication charges for that manuscript to appear quickly in print. Or else, if you did not have the money for that, you had to wait in a queue, a general queue for a pre-slot. And that used to take another 2-3 months' time before it could get into print. So it used to take quite a lot of time in those days for a manuscript to appear in print in a journal. And but now, with the advent of internet and information explosion in the last 2 decades, I mean, there's a whole sea change which has taken place in this scientific publishing industry. And nowadays, the communication of results has become very fast and very easy, and manuscripts can be sent by email immediately, and referee reports also could be obtained within a few days. And so one could see your manuscript, if it is accepted, maybe even within a month, it may appear in online as an accepted manuscript. So this electronic publishing has now become the norm, and so one had to again subscribe to these electronic journals, and again these costs are quite high, and the problem is that if anyone else wanted to have a look at your published paper, that person or his institution needed to have a subscription to that journal. Otherwise, that person could not download or see your manuscript in print. And typically in those days, one used to exchange what are called reference cards. They were called, these copy cards, where they used to send you a request for a copy of the manuscript, of the paper, published paper, and one used to send it by post to that person. So that's how it used to work. And so individuals did not have a right to look at the papers. And even if it's online, if a normal individual cannot have a look at a paper online unless he has a subscription to that journal, or one had to pay what is called an article download charge. And that is typically in the range of some $30 to $50 or something like that. Okay. So now what has happened is, because most of the publishing has become online, the cost of publishing has really come down. And with this, a new idea started taking place where, because as I said that to download an article, either one had to have access to a subscription or pay for downloading an individual article. Then they started thinking about a new model where it is called open access article, wherein the journal asks the author whether he can pay some amount of money, which is substantial, so that his article would become what is called as an open access article. Okay, it's called an open access article. So what do you mean by an open access article? That means anyone across the world sitting with a computer and an internet access, he can simply log into that journal website, and if that particular article he wants, it happens to be an open access article, he can download it without paying anything. Okay. Otherwise, as I said, the person had to pay anywhere between 30 to 60 US dollars to download an individual article. So this was a model which was started by some of the subscription-based journals, and this model was actually called the hybrid mode of publishing. So the subscription-based journal, they allow certain number of articles in the journal to become open access by taking the publication charges, or what is called the article publication or processing charge, from the author or from the institution of the author. And then that particular article becomes free for the reader to download. So basically what the journal wants to say is that you're purchasing an extra visibility to your manuscript or an article, and thereby trying to advertise yourself more. But there are certain issues with this kind of a model, which I will try to tell you. Because what happens is that when an author publishes an open access article through the institution, which is already subscribed to that journal, so it is like taking money from both hands from a single source. That is what is called as double dipping. Okay, that means the journal takes money from the institution as part of the subscription fees. Again, the journal takes money from the same institution in the form of a particular article which it makes which the author wants to make it as open access. So actually, because of this online online publishing, etc., there has to be actually decrease in the subscription rate to that particular institution library. If it happens that a lot of authors from that institution actually publish open access journal, but then that has not happened. So here, all these publishing houses, they don't want to cut through their profits. So they are also businesses, and they do not want to cut their profits which are coming in as such. So, but now what has happened is across the European countries, the funding agencies have realized this problem, and now they have started stopping, open access articles in subscription-based journals. So either it should be a fully open access journal, or it should be a fully subscription-based journal. And again, it so happens that many people from third world countries and lower income group countries and institutions, they don't have large funding budgets for libraries. And so these article processing charges are very, very high. Sometimes there are waivers where the journal may feel that the article is very important and they may agree to waive this processing charge, but then they're very, very rare cases. And it's also found that this article processing charge, actually, it's not sensitive to the market, but actually it is closely connected to what is called the perceived value of the publication. So if the journal feels that that the publication can have a very large value, okay, then they start putting these charges. It's like, it's a relative measure. Like, for example, if you have a painting by a very famous painter, someone had to validate that painting, right? Some group of peer reviewers would say that, yes, this is a very good painting. So then it commands more money in the market. So it's like that. And so people realize that actually all this money which is going into this hybrid mode of journals could actually be spent on more innovative and more sustainable publishing models. So with this in mind, what has happened is a couple of editors of some journals, they started a new model, and this was called open access publishing. This was actually started by a non-profit society called the Public Library of Science in the United States and the British Medical Journal. So they started what are called open access journals, and this is a very recent phenomenon, last 20 years or so. And here, of course, all the articles are open access articles, and one had to pay this article processing charge. And this model was, in fact, approved by the funding agencies in those countries. And so what has happened is many large subscription-based journals have now actually started fully open access journals, which are funded by the article processing charges. But then what are these charges? They are very, very high. Typically, they range from $1,000 to $3,000 as the article processing charges. And this is a very, very substantial barrier for many people coming from third world countries and lower income group countries. Okay. So this model does work, of course, in the West, but then it's not very clear how this model would work as far as the third world countries are concerned. Then there's another very important thing which happens regarding the copyright. In the subscription-based journals, whenever authors publish in subscription-based journals, you transfer all the copyright of your manuscript to the journal. The journal will hold the copyright of your manuscript and all the graphs and everything which is contained in that, all the data which is contained in that. So if anyone else wants to reproduce that data or reproduce that graphs published in that manuscript, one has to take permission from the publisher before copying that graph in his own paper. Okay. So, as I said, if anyone wishes to use any part of a published paper in subscription-based journal, they will have to obtain permission. But whereas in the case of open access articles, they use what is called a Creative Commons license, which enables anyone to simply copy that graph or any data which is shown in that manuscript, but with some reference to that manuscript, of course, and they can use that under this what is called a Creative Commons license. So it is found that most of these open access, many of the open access journals which are published by established societies, okay, they have very good impact factors, and it is worth really publishing in those kind of open access journals. So there is what is called an Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association, OASPA, which has been formed so that they can maintain, see, all these open access journals, they all maintain the same standards of scientific publishing, publication ethics and all those things as the subscription-based journals. So, and this society, which is OASPA, it tries to maintain this normalization of all this publication ethics and standards of scientific publishing across these open access journals. But see, in spite of all these things, there is always a reason to believe that all these standards can actually go for a toss when you look at the profits involved. So it's a very, very delicate balance between the business part of the whole thing and the scientific ethics part of the whole thing. So, and one very strange thing which can happen is if all these important scientific journals in the West, if they transform themselves to open access journals, where will, say, people from third world countries like India, etc., will stand? Because I don't know how many of our libraries or our institutions are willing to shell out $3,000 per paper per group of scientists for as publication charges for this open access publishing. So what is the other way around? It's still an open question. Okay, so now we come to the last part of the whole lecture series, which is called the predatory journals and publishers. So I had given you some indication about what these predatory journals are and what they do. So let's go into that very carefully. See, this was some email which I had received. It was completely in Chinese. I didn't know what it was. And it was obviously it had come from some publishing house. And then, of course, I used the normal recourse, that is our Google Translate. And then I found that what they were trying to say is that these are some, we can arrange conferences, we can arrange English publications, international monograph, and this is the latest call for papers. And the call for papers in these subjects like computers, big data, etc., and other directions also can be thought of, and some international conferences, so and so, so and so. And search time, I mean, the wait time is about 3 to 4 months for publication. And there are just 20 places left, please apply and all those things. So this is a typical, what do you mean by, what you call as solicitation. So this person is trying to solicit your attention and money to spend so that he can publish in their journal. So this is kind of a typical unwanted solicitation by some journal. And the moment you see such kind of a thing, you can immediately be sure that this is not a very well-meaning journal. And another example is that there's another mail which says that if you have you can upload your paper or proposal for a very special issue of this journal, okay? And you can now upload for a special issue and get an honorarium, and successful special issue organizers will be included in the steering committee of some important conference, and all this blah, 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 which is absolutely junk. And moment you see this kind of advertisements, you can be rest assured that they are just trying to fool you, and they're just after your money. So Nature has given a very nice article and defined what they mean by predatory journals. So they say that these are predatory journals, and publishers are entities that prioritize self-interest at the expense of scholarship and are characterized by false or misleading information, deviation from the best editorial and publication practices, lack of transparency, and or the use of aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. What I showed you in the last two slides was this indiscriminate solicitation practice. So this is how the predatory publishers try to play upon people's their state of minds. And they are, these people are driven purely by financial gain. So they are interested only in making money. They are just not bothered about scientific scholarship or following scientific ethics or publication ethics. And they try to attract these gullible researchers and even faculty through this very aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation. And they charge heavy fees for publication. And you can be rest assured that your paper can be in print within 1 month. And they don't follow any ethical publishing practices like peer review, editing, and they in general perpetuate very bad research. So how do you distinguish whether a journal is a predatory journal or a genuine journal? See, again, as I said, they often give very false or misleading information on their website. They do have websites. They put up very dubious statements, highly blown up and flowery statements. They have very fake impact factors. And if you look at the editorial board of those journals, you have all kinds of vague people. I mean, you may not even know anybody in your area of research. And so one good way to find out is to check whether they are members of this OASPA or the other COPE, etc., and whether they actually appear in typical databases for those particular areas of research. And also, any journal must highlight a very clear peer review process. If that is not there, and if proper guidelines are not there on their website, that means there is something wrong with that particular journal. Okay. And what could be the consequences of these predatory journals? See, whenever you publish anything in a good journal, you expect that it leads to improvement in that area of research, improvement in the knowledge, okay, benefit to the society in general, it could be technology, health, anything, and in general, good for mankind. But when we have these kind of predatory journals publishing all kinds of research, then it can basically lead to very disastrous situations, and especially in the field of medicine, as I said, it can lead to very harm to the patients also. And again, as I said, because when you publish such rotten data and rotten manuscripts, the scientific database in general, it gets corrupted. Okay, and the credibility of data will be a big problem. And the very serious thing which can happen is careers of young scholars that can get damaged because by chance you, without knowing, unknowingly publish in a predatory journal, you may be in for trouble. Okay. And if you do it knowingly, of course, you are in for it. Unknowingly, if you do it, of course, you cannot help it, but then you must be careful. That's why. So the careers can get damaged, and because it reflects very poorly on their integrity, and then the very credentials become questionable. Then the institutional profiles of the researchers who publish in these kind of journals, that also get affected. So that in turn affects their ranking. Like in India, we have this NAC credit ranking for institutions that will get affected. And sometimes, even after you pay the charges for publication, the people may just take your money and fly by night operators, they take the money and run away. And so ultimately what you can see is that these predatory journals, they simply result in a huge waste of time, money, and efforts of all the scientists who publish. And it will be much better if scientists would be more careful about these predatory journals and then publish only in established journals. But then that doesn't happen always. Why are these predatory journals still in business? That is because there is a policy like publish or perish. So you need to have a certain number of publications to maintain your position. So people publish, so they have to publish by hook or crook. So they go to these predatory journals, or rank ineptitude, you just don't know how to do things, and very poor research skills, you end up publishing in these journals. Then again, unhealthy competition. You want to have more number of publications than your corresponding colleague in your some colleague in your institution. So you want to be one up. So you publish in this because you are unable to publish in a normal journal. You publish it here. And finally, lack of awareness. As I said, you are ignorant about these journals, and then you end up paying a heavy price. So, and how do you stop these kind of things? This cannot be just done by one individual or some scientist alone. It has to be a proper, multi-pronged activity involving scientists, involving institutions, involving all these societies, publishing, established publishing houses. Once only if they can get together, one can do something about it. So, first of all, you have to create awareness about these predatory journals, especially among young scholars, and that will help a lot. And the community, scientific community, needs to collectively take up, cudgels against these journals and make sure that they get exposed all the time. And in India, especially, our University Grants Commission has taken a very, very positive step in this regard. And they have undertaken a very big exercise to combat this predatory publishing by establishing what a statutory body called UGC CARE, which is called the Consortium for Academic and Research Ethics. And you can go to this, you can type this in Google search, you can go to the website. This is maintained by University of Pune, and it gives you all lists of predatory journals and also pointers on how to avoid publishing or how to identify predatory journals and things like that. So I strongly advise all of you to look at the website of this UGC clear. Okay, so now we come to another final point in our lecture series, that is indexing of databases in research. See, over the years, if you now look at the developments in scientific research and also the way scientific research is now being archived with the advent of computation power and all those things, almost every scientific research is now getting archived. So everything gets stored, data is available, and if you look at the size of this data, it is actually mind-boggling. It's huge. And in such a situation, when you actually want to look for, say, a particular article in a particular area of research, and if you don't have access to computation facility or internet and access to databases, it's very difficult, like searching for a needle in a haystack. And because the large amount of data which is now available and accessible to people. So to help people locate the kind of research data or articles which they want in their particular area of research, this idea of scientific indexes or databases, they were actually created. And again, this started off, I think, again in the late 1960s or 1970s by one person called Eugene Garfield, who started what was called in those days as current contents. This guy had a very brilliant idea. What he did was simply he took all the contents of scientific journals. He started off in this field of life sciences, and he simply started collecting all the content pages of the journals in life sciences and publishing them in a small booklet called the current contents. So if a person, a researcher, did not have access to some journals in, say, life sciences, okay, he could simply buy this current contents, the small booklet, and it will have the contents at least of all the journals in that particular area of research, say life sciences, the top journals in life sciences. So you can simply browse through the contents. The contents, it has the title of the article, it has the name of the author, and possibly the affiliation of the corresponding author. So this much bibliographic information was contained in this current contents. And that was enough for at that time for a lot of people, because though they did not have access to many journals, they had access to what is called the current contents, and they could see that from the contents of many journals, the different papers in their area of research. And once they could find something interesting, they could always contact the author of that paper to send a reprint of that. Reprint is what the word I was looking for earlier. So reprint of the article. So you used to send what are called reprint requests. Earlier days, there was no email. You used to send them by post. So you had reprint request cards, which you could send to different authors and ask them to send their reprint of the manuscript or the paper. So nowadays, it's all by email, and you can always download. So this current content was a revolutionary step in the field of scientific databases. So this person started off with this current contents, and once it started, it gave rise to a whole new direction to management of scientific databases and scientific metadata of these journal papers. Okay, so this guy, it was 1955, not 1960. 1955, Eugene Garfield had this idea. which really revolutionized the dissemination and retrieval of scientific literature. Then he also created what is called a Science Citation Index. Okay, so what was the Science Citation Index? This was again a very revolutionary development. By using this Science Citation Index, first of all, you can identify what a particular scientist has actually published in a particular period of time and where he has published. That also one could get the information. Not only this, you could also get information on where that particular paper which was published by a scientist in some journal, where that particular paper or was cited by some other scientist in some other journal. So earlier days it was very difficult to get this information unless you go through all the journals yourself and try to look for all the references and find your name in the references and say, this guy has cited my paper in his article. Unless, of course, that particular scientist informs you himself that, look, I am citing your paper. You will not even know about it. But then with this click of a button using the Science Citation Index, one could actually see where your particular paper has been cited by others. So that gives an indirect estimate or a measure on how popular your particular paper was. If your paper was cited by many people in many journals, then it means that your work was scientifically very important, and a lot of people found that your work was very relevant, and that is why they have cited your paper. So that was one way by measuring your popularity of your not only popularity, the importance and relevance of your paper. And also it indirectly created what was called journal impact factors. So by finding out how many times a particular paper was cited of a particular journal was cited by others, that also gave an importance to that journal. So many people would be actually accessing that paper, that journal, and that paper from that journal. So the importance of the journal also became clear that when more people refer to that journal, the impact factor of that journal will actually increase. So that is how the impact factor of journal started coming in. And then, of course, now this has really expanded enormously. We have what is called the Web of Science, and then the Elsevier publishers, they have what is called Scopus scientific database. Then the American Institute of Physics has this what is called Citation. And now, mind you, these databases are not free. You have to again subscribe. So again, you have to take recourse to your institution library to access these databases. They don't come free. But Google started something called the Google Scholar, and this gives an indirect way. It doesn't give you so much information, but at least it gives an information on how and where a particular manuscript or paper has been cited and how many times it has been cited by others. So that much information is given by Google Scholar. So most of these databases are paid services, but then they do provide a huge amount of data and what is called metrics to the users. And the journals on their own, they also provide a lot of metadata on individual publication. If you look at online, if you look at a particular publication, at the end, you have what is called the metadata. And if you click on those flags, you can actually have an idea about how many people have actually, for example, accessed your paper, downloaded your paper, and things like. So that kind of data is also available by the journals themselves. Then, as I said, this impact factor. So what is this impact factor of journals? Basically, it's an average. It's a nearly mean of the number of citations of articles published in the last 2 years in a given journal. So if a particular journal, take any journal, maybe say Physical Review B or whatever you want. So what they do is they see in the last 2 years, Physical Review B, all articles in Physical Review B how many times those articles have been cited. So that gives an idea about the impact of that particular journal. So if a lot of people cite the papers, then of course that impact factor of that paper becomes very high. But then, this does not mean that all papers published in a very high impact journals are all brilliant or extraordinary. No, it doesn't happen like that. Similarly, you may have journals with very low impact factors, okay? And doesn't mean that a low impact factor doesn't mean that the articles published in that low impact factor journal are all not so good. No, that's not the case. You can have sometimes fantastic articles which are published in low impact journals. One example I had already told you about was this case of ITC superconductors, which was published in a journal called Zeitschrift für Physik, which was a national journal. It was a German journal. Not many people outside Germany knew about this journal or read this journal. So impact factor in those was very, very low at that time. But then this paper was published in that particular journal, and of course it won a Nobel Prize also. So these impact factors, one has to be careful and use these impact factors with a lot of caution. So one must not be always carried away by this this talk of high impact factors and all this. And though many institutions desire that your papers must be published in high impact journals, it's not always necessary that you should publish your papers in high impact journals. Okay, so finally, I just wanted to show an example of a scopus analysis of my own publication record. This starts around 2009 or so, because I could not access my record before this time. So you can see that with the time, the number of citations for my paper went on increasing, and the peak was around 250 or so in 2022, and 2023 it was about again same 250, and 2024 it stands at roughly about 100 and odd something. So of course, by the end of the year, I'm sure this will again also go up. And so this scopus gives a lot of information. It can also give you the scientific metadata on each paper published under my name. And you have all the number of times it has been cited in a particular year. All that data is now available at the just click of a button. Of course, as I said, one needs to have access to this database in order to get all this information. But for most of you who are belonging to DA institutions, I'm sure all the DA institutions are they have subscription to these databases like Scopus, etc., and you should be able to access these databases from your institutional computers and libraries. So this is how this scientific indexing and databases look like, and so this comes to, I think, the end of my lectures, and so I would like to this, in fact, one more point is that this also gives an idea about what is called the author H index. So this also gives an idea about the importance of your publications, depending on how many times your publications have been cited by others. So that gives some idea about your own standing in your area of research. So yeah, so that is what this Scopus and scientific databases are about. And so I have taken you across all these points, starting with what is intellectual honesty, research integrity. Then I told you about the fact about philosophy and things like that, philosophy of research. Then I took you through what are called the scientific misconducts, some of them the serious scientific misconducts, redundant publications. Then I told you about selective reporting, data misrepresentation, ethical issues, ethical committees, and then switching over to the publishing side, the publishing ethics, conflict of interest, then unethical behavior in publications, then authorship issues, very important, complaints, etc. Then finally, today I told you about predatory journals, publishers, and scientific databases. So with that, we actually come to the end of the lecture series. And these are some references which I have given at the end. So you can see there are some websites which are very, very important for you. And some books I also have written up here. So please go through these books, and most of them are available online. And so I advise you to go through these websites and books if possible. So that will help you. It may not help you directly in your particular scientific research which you're doing, but then it will definitely help you in your ethical part, and then at least give you an idea on how to go about in future with your scientific research. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, you're most welcome to ask. Any questions, please? The chat box. Yeah. Once an article is published in a journal, can it be uploaded on ResearchGate or other online platforms by the author, co-author? Any copyright issues with the publisher if done immediately? Yeah, that's true. You cannot actually upload the article directly on a website. You can always upload the article on your own website of your own institution and offer this article personally to your anyone interested who may write to you, and then send the article as a reprint personally to someone else. You cannot upload this article as long as it is under copyright. You cannot upload the article without the permission of the publisher on a general website like what you mentioned. What was that? Research. So that can you go down, please? Yeah, ResearchGate or something like that. Yeah. So one cannot do that. You can, of course, publish the abstract of your paper. That's not a problem. But the full paper, you can only offer it personally to the anyone who is interested. Yeah, what is that? There's another question there. Maybe नहीं ये दूसरा वाला. हाँ ये रहा. नहीं हमने भी दिखाया था ना क्वेश्चन था वो. हाँ that white.
White looks a day.
Huh? Article is published. Once an article is published, can it? Yeah. I think this is the same question. Yeah. So I suppose that answers your question. Any more questions, please? If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask also. Any more questions? Okay, so if there are no more questions, so that's the end of this series. So thank you very much, all of you, for your patience and attention. And yeah, that's it. See you again sometime. Bye. Can you give any, sorry. Can you give any notes on your topics for exam? I have already given you a set of references today. All my talks have been sourced from these references. And so if you can please go through the references which I had given you and go through my talks. My talks are available online. So you can always go through the talks again. And any particular issue or topic you want any clarification, you can always, you're welcome to write to me on email, and I'll be very happy to explain to you whatever you want. Thank you.